As 2025 starts to wind down, it's kind of wild that the comedy world is still arguing about the same thing it's been arguing about for years. Not jokes, not craft, not even money, but Joe Rogan, the Rogansphere, and what all of it supposedly represents. What's changed isn't the argument itself, it's how entrenched everyone seems to be. That contrast came into sharp focus recently with Bryan Callen appearing on The Overdogs, where he went into full defense mode for the Rogansphere. Callen's position is pretty clear and very on brand. In his view, critics of Joe Rogan aren't brave truth-tellers or concerned observers. They're the old guard, legacy media, cultural gatekeepers who've been made irrelevant by podcasting and don't know how to cope with it.
I'm always seeing your clips with Schaub and Rogan. And, recently, who was it? I don't even want to name drop them because they didn't want to put Joe Rogan on the list for one of the best political podcasts for political information, things like that. And, what was that? Golden Globes wouldn't put Rogan on the list,
Of course they wouldn't. No.
Why?
Because he threatens what whether they know it or not. Rogan was the great disruptor on a number of counts. He was at the forefront of podcasting. So what did podcasts do? Well, it took the old gatekeepers, the old guard of information, which was legacy media, and it made it essentially irrelevant in many ways. Nobody cares about the Golden Globes or the Oscars anymore. Movies have lost their cultural significance. And when you have someone like Rogan, the other thing see, historians will write a number of things about Joe Rogan, in my opinion. One of the main things I think they'll write is that the dude was a regular guy. I've known him for 30 years. He was not an educated guy, but he was always curious. And what Rogan did was he explored his curiosity publicly so that all of a sudden you got welders in the north of England listening to a podcast about ancient Egypt.
He goes even further, turning the whole thing into a kind of evolutionary argument. According to Callen, a lot of Rogan's critics have never thrown a punch or dealt with what he calls objective reality. They don't hunt, they don't train, they don't handle physical risk. So when people who do enter the room, fighters, outdoorsmen, guys who lift heavy things, it creates insecurity. Instead of competing, they critique. Instead of engaging, they tear reputations down online. Words become weapons because physicality isn't an option.
And so the Golden Globes, bro, They don't know that dude, man. When they're around people like you, Mike, or they're around people like Rogan, especially like somebody who fights, like that shit's alien to them. And the women act a certain way until they get drunk and then they're all over you. But that's a different story. But you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden the caveman walks in, Mike Perry walks in and he can kill everybody in the room with their bare hands. You know what happens? Women don't like that they're attracted to that, and men want to be that, but they can't, so then they'll start to criticize. They're like, he's probably dumb. That's what they say, dumb stuff like that. Okay? And so I think it's very hard for people who've never thrown a punch, never come into contact with objective reality. It's very hard for them to give up a piece of the pie to people who hunt, who own guns, who train, who learn how to choke somebody and kill somebody with their bare hands. That shit's weird. A lot of people are like, hey man, we've evolved past that.
It's a very Callen way of looking at the world. Cavemen versus scribes, strength versus abstraction, podcast versus institutions. And in that framing, Rogan's success isn't about misinformation or controversy. It's about regular people finally being trusted with complex ideas, whether that's nutrition, ancient history, or how the body works, without needing elite credentials to access them. Then you flip over to Marc Maron on the sideboard, and it feels like you've entered a completely different universe. Same industry, same people, totally different diagnosis. Maron doesn't see Rogan as a disruptor liberating the masses. He sees him as the center of what he's been uncomfortable with for decades.
So I have a question. Like, it seemed like 2015 is when like things started to ramp up, because I know there was like Dark Ages, and then there was like the Rogansphere kind of came in here and kind of ramped things up a little. What was your place at the Comedy Store during those years when it seemed to be like maybe a little more packed around here, or just like Tom Segura, Bert Kreischer, all these guys like living here rather than like going to Austin, you know?
I don't know. I was in Boston doing shows when Rogan started. So I've known that guy when he started. And I never liked him really.
Yeah.
And look, we were coworkers. I mean, there's this idea that we are a community, and we are. And like it always felt tense to me with him, but it was really me.
Was it competitive?
Was it his comedy, or was it like a vibe?
Yeah.
I just didn't think that
Offstage.
comedy was for the jocks, you know?
Yeah. Not for me, brother.
It was just that, like, he came in as a kickboxing champion, and then the whole fear factor thing. It's just like, to me, and then he co-opted, this idea that he was somehow, representing Hicks, and that bothered me. That but look, he paid his dues. He's a real comic.
Yeah.
But the sphere of men that he attracted to were the opposite of me.
Yes.
And and I never got into comedy to be hang out with the bros.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much a lone wolf, really. And that was the other thing I learned with Kennison, is that you never become part of an entourage.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to take you anywhere.
Yeah.
He talks about feeling unsettled when Rogan leaned into ideas associated with Bill Hicks, as if something deeply personal to him had been co-opted by a completely different cultural lane. And more recently, that tension boiled over when Rogan spent a long stretch of a podcast essentially character assassinating him, calling him bitter, mentally ill, or resentful. Maron doesn't deny his flaws. In fact, part of his frustration is that Rogan's research was sloppy, accusing him of things that were simply untrue, like abandoning Mitch Hedberg or cutting people off out of jealousy.
But like, Rogan, when he tried to, character assassinate me for an hour a few weeks ago.
I saw that.
Did you love that or what?
I didn't watch it the whole thing. I just saw bits and pieces.
You must like that you're living in his head a lot, though, because
Took a while.
he went like months and months, maybe years without talking about you, and one day he's like, you know what? Fuck it. And he just got in on it.
They all did. And it was the day after I ended my podcast, which was kind of
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't have a fucking mic right now.
And
That's crazy.
and also like Schultz took a shot at me, DeStefano took a shot at me. And like Schultz was trying to bait me, but it all happened like within days of each other. So
Yes.
I don't know if there was a group text or
Yeah, I think it is.
WhatsApp message.
Today's a day. Pod's over. Let's hit him.
We've been counting the
But
minutes.
like, what Rogan was saying, like a lot of it was nothing I hadn't said myself, and I don't think it made him look particularly good because he did research, and and he's the king of the do your own research crew, and I think after all is said and done, what bothered me the most was he did get some facts wrong as people who did their own research. I can take the hit, and if he wants to make me look, like if he wants to call me mentally ill or bitter or sad or, but there was this idea that like he said that anybody that I was friends with who became more successful than me, I would not be friends with them anymore.
Yeah.
Which isn't fundamentally true.
Yeah.
And then he said it happened with Louis, it happened with Hedberg. It never happened with Hedberg.
Yeah.
Hedberg and I were fine. Hedberg was his own world.
Yes.
But the thing is like there is a truth to, as I said before, about the idea of being part of someone else's success is a dead end street in a lot of ways. I mean, some of the Austin guys have done all right with it because they created a community, and it was more of they created their own show business. But if you're too close to somebody who gets very famous, and then you're like, oh, I'll go open for them. I was never that guy. I'm not going to fly in anyone's private plane.
Yes.
And I'm not going to open for a peer, really.
Yeah.
It's just I don't have the ego to do it.
Maron insists that what distance exists in his career comes from wanting to be his own person, not someone riding shotgun in another comic's success story. Where Callen sees insecurity in critics, Maron sees something closer to a cult of personality. He's openly critical of what he calls the anti-woke comedy movement, arguing that a lot of it isn't actually risky or rebellious, it's just loud. Social media numbers, outrage cycles, and audience size start to matter more than originality. And when several comics like Andrew Schultz and Chris DiStefano took shots at him in quick succession, Maron couldn't help but notice how coordinated it felt, like a pile-on disguised as independent thought. Put these two perspectives side by side, and you start to see why this argument refuses to die. Callen is talking about power, who has it now and who lost it. Maron is talking about identity, who he is, who he never wanted to be, and why adjacency to power feels suffocating rather than freeing. And maybe that's why, even at the end of 2025, this debate still hasn't gone anywhere. They're not arguing about the same thing. One side is obsessed with disruption, relevance, and physical reality. The other is concerned with authenticity, individuality, and what comedy is supposed to mean beyond numbers.